The word of the Lord this evening is from the book of John, chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that we all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light, the true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks ahead of me, because he was before me.' From his fullness we have received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known." The word of the Lord. This morning, I began to talk in our fourth Sunday of Advent service about this wonderful Christmas miracle, this incarnation of God as a human person, as Jesus. This incredible thing for God to do, to put on flesh. And as I spoke to you then out of Matthew, I drew your attention with particular focus to the connection between that miracle, the incarnation, and salvation. That the fact that God is with us indicates that it's all going to be okay. That God's on our side, that God is here in our midst, and he's willing to do that, to deal with our mess. It has incredible implications on God's end. By the way, I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I will. It also has incredible implications, I'm going to use a fancy word now, ecclesiologically. It has incredible implications for the way we think about church and the way we think about worship. Because if God was a human, then humanity is in and of and with God. Humanity is not something that we want to take out of our worship experience. And that means that when hymns get rearranged, or candle lighters get lost, or there's feedback on the microphone, we don't have to, wish we could just pipe in a satellite service that would be clean and orderly and not have any humanity left in it. Actually, some of our human foibles, if they're not immoral, if they're not hurting people, can actually help us to appreciate that aspect of God. That God would have needed diapers if they had them back then, when he was born in that manger. That's a real thing, and that we can come before God as those kind of people. So, God's with us. But today, we're in John. And John is doing something even deeper and even farther. He's pushing our understandings of what it means that the Word became flesh. And it's very out there, some of the language, so I want to go through it kind of slowly. Okay? It begins in the beginning, which is a good place for things to begin, generally. But when John begins with those words, in the beginning, and it's at the beginning of his gospel, it's the first thing he says at all, he's reminding you of something else on purpose. He's reminding you of the book of Genesis, which also begins in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. In fact, the word Genesis means in the beginning. We didn't know what to name the book, so we just took the first part of it and called that the name. We do that often. We do it with hymns, too. So he references the book beginning. Why? Why does he want you to have Genesis in mind? Well, John thought this through. It turns out that there was a rabbinical idea that was being bandied around Judaism called divine condescension. And here's the thinking. These people knew nothing of Jesus Christ. They were awaiting the Messiah, but they recognized that in the creation there was this mercy for us. Because prior to creation, and there was, to say that God was before creation means that there was a prior to creation. God was everything. And God, who was everything, at one point had to choose to be less than everything. To create something that was not him. And to do that, there's a kind of humility there. It's a grandiose kind of humility. It's the kind of humility that you can only have and celebrate if you're the creator of the universe, but he has it. That's something special, and we learn that from Genesis, that God is a God who's willing to limit himself for the sake of love and creativity. Creativity is important enough in itself to be less than everything. John thinks about that, and he says, I can use that. I can take that concept and I can weave into it this new thing. And he begins to weave Jesus into the existing creation cosmology. Jesus is the word that God spoke. When God said things like, let there be light, Jesus is that light that the darkness cannot overcome. The same light that became, follow me on this, part of creation. You see how John is using Genesis to now give you a foretaste and anticipation of the coming of Jesus as a human? John points out that God has always participated with humanity and with Israel throughout biblical history, and so he gives a name to that participation. He calls it the Word. In Greek, that word is logos. It has so much deeper implication than we have in our English word. In Chinese Bibles, if you read the Bible in translation in China, you'll see it translated as Tao, which in some ways has some more of that weight of the logos. It's the word with a capital W. Well, meanwhile, while John is doing this, and he's playing with the kind of Jewish history of theology, over on the other side of the Mediterranean, the Greek philosophers are puzzling over Homer and Hesiod and stories that imply that the gods are chaotic and quibbling, and that the world, therefore, should just make no sense, except that there's been this thing called the Ionian miracle, and people in Greece and the Greek Empire are starting to realize more and more that actually there's a lot to the world that does make sense. And so they're not puzzling about why a good God who's everything would create. It makes sense why they do all sorts of crazy things with no motivation. But the trouble they have is, why do they do things with any motivation? Why does the universe make so much sense if it's made of a bunch of quibbling gods that don't get along? It has an intelligent structure and a logic and an order to it. And Plato gave a name to this order that overarches the whole world, that made more sense to him than the myths. And he gave the word logos, which is the root of our word logic, or like biology. That's the word bio and then logos. So you'll recall that Jesus is a Greek version of a Hebrew name that means Savior. Logos, then, is a Hebrew version of a Greek concept of monotheism. The worlds are colliding in Jesus Christ in the New Testament, and everybody from the East and the West starts to have a way in to understand and to access Jesus in this beautiful, poetic narrative that John gives us. But John goes further than Plato. Plato sat down and wrote books and essentially figured out a way into monotheism all by himself. And that was pretty cool of Plato. But Plato could not have imagined what John did next when he said, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us." It's another really interesting word. It's eskeonen. It means literally to build your tent. Eugene Peterson, in his Message translation, translates that the Logos became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. To dwell among us, to hang out there for a while. And we beheld his glory. The Word, the pre-incarnate Word, the Logos that holds the universe together, came to Bethlehem and settled down. And he became a refugee for a while in Egypt. And then he built his house in Nazareth, on the wrong side of the tracks. But wait, there's more. In case none of that was enough, John pulls one more crazy Ivan with the history of human thought when he draws himself and us right into the middle of the narrative. It's no coincidence that John includes someone whose name he shares into the middle of this light and life imagery. Jesus is the light, and folks like John, that is, people named John. John is talking about John the Baptist, but the wording he used, there was a man sent from God whose name was John, who came as a witness. He's talking about John the Baptist historically and himself in the midst of that. People, if Jesus is the light, then people named John have to shine that light. Regular Joes have to shine that light. People around us. And that light has to go out so that people will believe. And John says at the end of his gospel that he wrote so that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the only Son of God. John the theologian cares about this believing just as much as John the Baptist did. And do you see all this sun imagery in the text? Seriously, open up your Bibles and look at it. Don't just believe that it says what I'm telling you. It says look at it. Over and over again, we've got son, or some translations say child. And in verse 12, John tells us that we are given the right to become children of God. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God. So Jesus is the Son, and through him we all have power to become children. Jesus is the Word, and through him we all need to go out to all nations and preach the Word to every tribe, tongue, and nation. Jesus is the true light that enlightens everyone. And what does the Bible say that we are? Light of the world. City on a hill. So do you see this pattern here? We're supposed to emulate Jesus the way a disciple follows a rabbi. We're supposed to be like Jesus in everything. And the central, most profound, most important factual attribute about Jesus is that Jesus became flesh and pitched his tent in our space. Jesus did not appear in the clouds with thunder and lightning and say, "I am the Lord. Approach me on my terms and thou wilt live." He could have done that. He perhaps should have. He had every right to. It would have been a lot easier and it would still have been very merciful. Better than we deserve. But Jesus didn't do that. He said, "I'm going to enter into the daily life of my people and become one of them, not above them, perhaps a little below those of them that were born in Rome or in Jerusalem. And I won't just invite them to my spaces. I'll accept their invitations. Couch surf, to add a little anachronistic detail, to go to people's houses and eat with them, the houses of sinners. And I'll do this even if it costs me dearly." And the first disciples of Jesus Christ did likewise. They didn't stop being God. They were never God, but they went and accepted invitations and went to people and met them where they were, joining other cultures, adopting other customs, familiarizing themselves with scholars and poets to reach them with the Word, with a capital W. Well, unfortunately, the Incarnation teaches us that God is a missionary. God is a missionary. God was sent. The Greek word is apostello. He was sent, and then he sent us, called us to be apostles. So we worship a missionary God, and we are all called, if we are Christians, to be missionaries. And that was understood for a long time, but somewhere through Christian history, we mostly have lost track of that. That's the unfortunate thing, that unlike the first disciples, we as a group, I'm not calling out anyone in particular or any church in particular, but we as Christians do some things really well, like theological thinking and doctrine. We do that well. But incarnational ministry, being missionaries, we mostly ignore. We love to build programs and ministries and even do acts of service that are designed to bring people here. Come here. Come to me. In my space, where I have the control. Increase our numbers. Increase our glory. Fill our pews. Give us offerings. In other words, we do the exact opposite, we Christians, of what God did and what God taught us to do at Christmas. And we've taken mission and missionaries, and we've pretended like they're a small group of select people with special gifts and a special calling on their life to go someplace far away. And us normals, we just have to send them money once in a while, and we've fulfilled our missionary obligation. But that understanding of mission, not only is it foreign to the New Testament, but it makes no sense. I know, as someone who's gone on mission and become a full-time support-raising missionary in Kansas, I love people sending money at me and all. Your Catholic guilt is great for that, but as soon as you leave your home and make your home somewhere else in a mission field, then that's your home. It's not far away anymore. If you go on an international mission and you go to another country, by the time you get there, you're in that country. If you learn a foreign language, you speak that language. And so the only place anyone can ever be a missionary is nearby, in a country that they're in with a language they speak. Missionaries can only ever missionize at home. And so those of us who stay home are not immune to our call to be missionaries. The lion's share of most church budgets goes to buildings and building maintenance. Christians spent over $3 billion last year on buildings, all to worship a God who said, "I dwell not in houses made with human hands." And it doesn't work. It does not work. Those churches are declining. They're losing members. And it's not a surprise. Why? The world isn't impressed by buildings. Why would it be? What if, when I took this call from Austin, Texas, to serve here in Orlando, I refused to move into town? And I said, yeah, it's great. I really like the job. I like the benefits. I like the salary. But I'm going to move to Daytona. I like it better there. And I'll commute in. Don't worry. I'll be there on Sundays. And if you want to meet with me, you can drive up, and I'll be available to you. I can do everything else by email. It's no problem. You'd probably be bothered by that. You might not have the words to explain why it's theologically problematic, just like the lost don't have the words to explain why they're not real impressed by the church right now. But would you feel loved? Would you hear my message with the same authority as if I moved in across the street and joined the neighborhood on the Nextdoor app and got hit with the hurricane and got to know this community of faith and what it loves and what it values? But guess what? Some of you live in Apopka, and DeBerry and Kissimmee, and Tiffany and I can't dwell there. Well, we dwell here. So you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to dwell in those places. And if you're a visitor today for Christmas Eve, who doesn't regularly come to church but feels perhaps maybe like you should because it's Christmas, you felt attracted to come join us tonight, I just want to say to you, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to come to us. That should have been our job. I'm glad you're here. I hope that now that you are here, you will feel warmly welcomed, but I want you to recognize that you're doing the Jesus thing right now. To come and meet us on our terms thing. And I hope our terms are nice. We have cookies, but we want to do better. We want to do better. We want to learn and get to know you in real life and figure out how to meet you and your people and minister well to you and know how to give good gifts to you and your neighborhood and your community and the people who like what you like and share the light with them. We don't just want to know you in a see you next week terms. We want to know your real life and know when you need dog sitting so we can hook you up. That's the kind of life we want to live, in the mess and the reality. That's the kind of life Jesus entered into at Christmas time. The true light that enlightens everyone has come into the world. And if we keep it hidden in this sanctuary, the world may never see it. Let's share our light. Amen.